Hello everybody, and welcome to Theology 101. Welcome to our Friday series where we are going over pictures of faith from Hebrews chapter 11. Today we will talk about the first woman listed in this chapter, Sarah. Sarah's faith is going to be informed by one fact: she was barren. Now we need to understand that barrenness or infertility was a very big deal during the time of Sarah for two reasons. First, children were social blessings. Without children, when you became older, you didn't have a source of income. Your children were your social security plan. Second, children were spiritual blessings. A woman who had children was considered blessed by God. This explains why throughout the Old Testament, you see barren women crying out to God for children. So a woman who didn't have children was very vulnerable. Not only would she lose her friends, but she will also lose her husband and not have any financial security blanket to help her. As a result, a barren woman was only left with three choices. First, her husband will divorce her and find a new wife who could bear children. Second, she would need to share her husband with another woman in a polygamous marriage so that he could have children through other women. Or third, she can offer up a concubine as a surrogate to have children for her. As you can see, none of these options were ideal. Therefore, barrenness became a picture of hopelessness in the Old Testament. Now, as we go through Hebrews chapter 11, the first woman we are introduced to is a barren woman. By faith, Sarah herself received power to conceive even when she was past the age, since she considered him faithful who had promised. Notice how Moses introduces the story of Abraham in Genesis chapter 11. You will see a list of men and their sons, and then notice something that should stick out like a sore thumb. Now, Sarai was barren. She had no child. Moses, as a director, tells us what he wants to underline. He wants us to keep in mind that everything we are about to read takes place with the backdrop that Sarai was barren. However, Sarai receives life-changing news. God promises Abram that he will create a nation through him and Sarai. Finally, Sarai will have the son she has been waiting for. But then a month passes and her pregnancy test returns negative. Then a year passes and both Abram and Sarai are confused. 10 years has passed and now Abraham is 86 years old, and this is very bad news for Sarai. Why? According to ancient Near Eastern custom, a husband will give his barren wife 10 years before he will divorce her. So if she does not have a child within the year, then she knows that Abraham has every legal right to leave her. Sarai cannot wait for God any longer and comes up with a plan. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children. She had a female Egyptian servant whose name was Hagar. And Sarai said to Abram, "Behold now, the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Go in to my servant. It may be that I shall obtain children by her." Can you hear Sarai's tone? Notice how she blames God for preventing her from having any children. Her faith in God's promises is starting to wane, and so she only sees one solution to her problem. Abram must sleep with her Egyptian slave, Hagar. Now, before you react with disgust, this would have been a normal response of any barren woman. Like I mentioned before, one option a barren wife would have was to have a concubine serve as a surrogate. So Sarai brings one of her slaves, who is an Egyptian slave she received as a dowry from Pharaoh, and Abram impregnates Hagar. Now Sarai knows that the reason why she doesn't have a child is not Abram's fault, it's her fault. Sarai thought that this was her clever way of receiving a son, just like God promised, and to keep Abram as her husband. But her manipulation just brought more pain to her life. Sarai probably looked at Hagar's son Ishmael every day and just became more resentful because he was a reminder that she could not get pregnant. So Sarai dealt harshly with Hagar and her son Ishmael to the point that they ran away. Sarai was angry because deep down she knew that Ishmael wasn't the son that God promised. Why do I say that? Previously, Abraham asked God whether one of his relatives, like a nephew, could act as his heir through which this great nation will come. But notice how God responds to Abram. "And behold, the word of the Lord came to him. This man shall not be your heir. Your very own son shall be your heir." The phrase, "your very own son," is literally a son from your loins, or a biological son. Abram and Sarai both knew that God promised that he will provide a biological son for them, not a son through a surrogate. But Sarai's story is not over yet. We see God re-enter the picture. Now, if you think waiting for 10 years is a long time, fast forward to when Abram is 99 years old and has been waiting for 24 years for a son. However, God repeats his promise that he will be given a son and that Ishmael is not the son of promise. At this point, God changes Abram's name to Abraham, meaning father of many, and changes Sarai's name to Sarah, which means princess. Then God adds that their future son will be named Isaac, which means to laugh, because Sarah will laugh at the idea that she will have her own son one day. Now, why does Sarah laugh at this idea? The text tells us why. The way of woman has ceased to be with Sarah, meaning that Sarah went through menopause. You see, having a child at 90 is not that unbelievable during this time because people live for hundreds of years and reproduce for a while. What made Sarah laugh was that she has already gone through menopause. It was physically impossible for her to have children. However, a year later, at the age of 90, Sarah gave birth to Isaac, and God had the last laugh. From the outside, it might seem like Sarah did not have strong faith. She introduced a concubine and laughed at God's promise. But we need to understand that Sarah didn't laugh at God because of arrogance, but disappointment. Yes, Sarah's faith wasn't perfect, but the author of Hebrews tells us that she did live by faith because she still waited on God. You see, it took faith for Sarah to trust Abraham to leave their hometown of Ur and go to a foreign land. It took faith for Sarah to trust Abraham when he lied and tried to have Pharaoh marry her so that he wouldn't be killed. Even when Abraham had proven himself not to be a trustworthy husband, Sarah still respected him enough to submit to him. This is why the Apostle Peter highlights Sarah's submission. For this is how the holy women who hoped in God used to adorn themselves, by submitting to their own husbands, as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord. Sarah continued to submit and follow Abraham, even though he lied again, this time to Abimelech, to have him marry Sarah so that he wouldn't be killed. But what happened was that both times other men tried to sleep with Sarah, God intervened and protected her. Why? Because God promised Sarah that she will have a son with Abraham, and not through Pharaoh or Abimelech. God remained faithful to Sarah and protected her. And even though Sarah may have questioned God's word at times, or took matters into her own hands, she lived by faith by waiting on God. And God did reward that faith by providing her with the promised son she has been waiting for her entire life. If you want to study more about Hebrews chapter 11, I'll leave a link to a recommended resource in the description box below. If you missed the last video about Abraham's faith, I'll leave a link here for you to watch. Until next time, see you!